inspired, fired up and on the move. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the places and all the races, arm in arm now, upon our feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the schools and all the homes, it's time to take it. It's time to take it to the street.
Gonna get militant up in here. Thank you for joining us once again for this week's episode of The Call, the program that calls you to action, to advocacy, to educate people, and just do what you need to do to make the change that we must have. And today we have a good friend of mine all the way from Houston, Texas, a warrior, EJ, a warrior for a long time, and a brother of mine. And it is Juan Paras, the executive director of Tejas, who has been doing environmental justice work and fighting the good fight. So Juan, how are you doing? And always good to see you, brother.
Likewise, and thank you for the invitation here to speak with, I guess, your audience.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. So why don't you tell, folks, a lot of us who do this work, we know you and know you well, and your work of your wife, Anna. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about Tejas, and what brought you to the movement?
Okay, well, what happened was that back, it was like 1993 or so. I had been an international union organizer practically all my life. And it was about the time that I switched jobs. And it was very difficult finding a job, because once you're an international union organizer, basically nobody wants to hire you, right? So,
troublemaker.
Yeah. So anyway, I was struggling, and then there's what I got a call on the telephone, and it was from Louisiana, and they said they had received my resume and if I was interested on the job that I applied for. And I look at my wife, and unbeknown to me, she had sent my resume to them. And she just kind of puts her hand to her face. It was
that's Anna.
telling me, it was like pointing to herself. I sent your resume in, don't say nothing. So anyway, luckily I ended up with a job. It was with the Louisiana Labor Neighbor Project. Mm-hmm. And Dan Nicola was the director. And that's small it was just Dan Nicola and I. But it was funded by the oil, chemical, and atomic workers, because they were on a lockout with BASF. And this is the longest lockout in history that the unions had. And for those that don't know, lockout is when the unions are negotiating with anyone. Either the unions call for a strike, right? Basically, they're refusing to work. And the lockout is when the company says, well, we're not going to let you come back to work. So anyway, that lockout was the longest lockout in the US history. And that's how I started working in Louisiana. And one of their issues, obviously, was because they were dealing with Formosa, were environmental concerns. They cared about their community, their exposure to all those known chemicals that was impacting the St. James Parish and primarily African-American community. So that's how I got started, unbeknown that I would still be doing environmental justice work until today.
Oh yeah, so that's union work is something else. I was a union rep, departmental rep for CWA, Communication Workers of America, and the secretary for a short period for the legislative committee. But it's hard work, and especially when you're in a southern state that's a right to work state. It's really hard then, yeah. But so how did you come about forming Tejas, being involved with Tejas?
Well, after working up there, I I got recruited actually by Texas Southern University, which is an HBCU. I knew some lawyers there that were working on environmental cases,
Mm,
and they knew I was from Texas, so they invited me to come work at TSU at the law school doing outreach and on environmental justice. So I came back to Texas and I worked at TSU for about another 8 or 10 years. And then I decided to start our own organization because what happens when you work at a university, sometimes they really support you and sometimes you don't get as much support as you need. And
mm,
one of the reasons that most universities here in Houston, why you don't see them very active against the industries, because Houston is the hub basically for all the industry, and they get a lot of financial support from the industry. So while it's like playing games with the industry, the universities, they don't want to really attack them because they get a lot of money from them, but they also want to kind of connect and tell the communities what's going on.
mm,
So that's the predicament that I was in, that we couldn't really go too much full force. And then finally I got laid off. I guess and then they closed the clinic, which
mm.
is sad because it was one of the very few law clinics in the schools, HBCUs, that was actually doing environmental justice work on behalf of, people of color.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah. So
Mm,
after I got laid off, of course, it's difficult to figure out what to do next because you didn't know, it was unexpected. So we started our nonprofit, and we figured, well, this kind of work is significant, it's important, it's impacting minorities, primarily low income people of color. And we started our organization in 2006. Now,
mm,
here's another reason why we started the organization in 2006. The Houston Independent School District was going to be, at that time, decided to build 2 new high schools because, too many students, right?
mm,
Population. So they decided to build a new high school in the very privileged, wealthy side of town, which is the west side of town. And then they decided to build another high school in the east side of town, which is primarily where the low-income communities are. And as they were building the West End High School and the East End High School, when they identified the locations of where the schools were going to be built, the one that was going to be built in our community was less than a quarter of a mile from Texas Petrochemical, ExxonMobil, Goodyear Tire and Rubber. So having had a little experience on, environmental justice issues, we picked up that fight and we said, we're not going to let this school get built here, or at least we're going to fight like hell to keep it from getting built. Needless to say, I'll just give you a summary of about a year and a half of trying to negotiate the non-construction of, because we didn't want it built there, okay? So during this course of about a year and a half, here's the strategy, because we were meeting with about, a lot of school administrators, a lot of community folks. At the meeting, we generally had about 25 folks in there, and they were all in favor of the school because we did need a school. But our opposition was, we need a school, we probably need 2 or 3 more, but not in this location. So I tell folks that they outsmarted us because like around 6 months into the program, the school was going to be East End High School. That's the name of it. And then the West End High School was West End High School. Around 3 or 4 months into the program, they decided, we had some community meetings, Juan, and the community decided that what they'd rather name the school is, instead of the East End, they want to name it after Cesar Chavez.
Right,
So
right.
that was a heck of a strategy because, they claimed that a lot of people, wanted a change and they respected Chavez. So that's how they managed to get support for this. And so we said, well, look, it doesn't matter if you name it after Cesar Chavez. I knew personally Cesar Chavez and I respect. I said, but that you're not addressing the issue. The issue we're concerned about is air toxins and the possibility of, back then they didn't have the RMP plan, but about accidents happen so close to the school. So then they came back after several months and they said, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be the first environmental school in the nation and they named it Cesar Chavez Environmental Magnet School.
Mhm.
They said now they can study about their own environment, and if something happens, well, they'll be learning about their environment. So they did those two things, and we lost the battle. But that was basically the start of why we said we need to start an organization. So give us legitimacy instead of just one person, as they say, bitching and complaining, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I actually visited that area, and for people who don't know, Cesar Chavez was a great organizer for people, migrant workers and workers, agricultural workers, and had led a nationwide strike on grape growers and others, and got decent wages and sanitary conditions. But that was the switch. That's how they switched up the game, because that would be the equivalent of them coming to the African American community and saying, "Oh, we decided to name the school after Martin Luther King Jr." You know what I mean? And of course, people automatically say, "Hey, this is a great opportunity for us to represent, to have representation for one of our great leaders." So that was when they switched up, like you said, the game and caused division. But that is in the community where I went on your toxic tour, and I want you to talk about the refineries and how long of a stretch there is where the pollution is so bad that you have houses right up on each other, because there's really no zoning, right up near refineries, because there's really no zoning in Houston, and the toxins and the pollution is so bad that in some places don't the street lights stay on 24/7, because they think it's always dusk, always getting ready to turn become night, right?
You bet. The the stretch of refineries and chemical plants that we have here in Houston stretch all the way to Galveston, Texas, which is approximately, if you take the ship channel route, it's about 52 miles of refineries and chemical plants. And it's very difficult to address a 52-mile stretch of refinery and chemical plants for, basically representing all the communities. We don't have a huge staff like national groups do, but so it's a task, and it's almost going from one fight to the next and not winning very many, okay? I'll be honest with you, not really winning cases, but at least making a difference on limiting admissions, or, air monitors are placed in areas that they didn't have monitors to sort of, I guess, please us to some degree. But it's not about, like you would say, it's not about pleasing us. It's about, doing what's right for those communities that live on the fence line of the industry. So it's been a long struggle. Just recently on the Valero case in Manchester, we got a pending lawsuit going on with them because they wanted to release, or their intent is to release 512 tons of hydrogen cyanide. Hydrogen cyanide, for those that don't know, and I didn't know myself, is a chemical that they used to exterminate the Jewish population during World War II. So obviously it's very toxic, right? So we have a lawsuit on that, and we have other issues that are impacting communities along the Houston Ship Channel. One of them that is very critical, and this is still going on and nationally been debated, is the RMPs. RMPs are risk management plans. And the issue behind RMPs is, what is the worst case scenario if a plant, explodes, burns up, or even a terrorist attack, okay? And the worst case scenario is that in a lot of cases, the Fenceline community is in what they call the area that is death, injury, or bodily harm. And if you're that close to a facility, that the worst thing that can happen is death, injury, or bodily harm because you're so close to it. What we have been saying in the environmental justice movement and others is that zone needs to be addressed. If it's that bad, the communities ought to be moved away from that zone of injury or bodily harm. But of course, that takes money, right? And then they always say, well, it's never going to happen. Well, why did you address the worst case scenario and you actually came up with a plan that says, this is how bad and risky it is for these communities? But because the information is so critical to actually help us and help communities, it is no longer public information. It used to be readily available. Now, if I try to get information, or if you try to get information on the RMPs, what they'll tell you is that you have to go to either a federal courthouse and look up that information yourself. And as you're looking for that information, there may be one or two people standing behind your back, questioning you, why do you need this information? Why are you taking pictures? Why are you doing this and that? And even if you tell them, well, I live in the community and I want to know, what's the worst thing that can happen? Bottom shell is no longer public information. Or it is, but you have to go through a lot of, loops to get that information. And right now, we're trying to get the Biden administration to reopen and have communities access to that as we used to initially. But the industry's fighting us, you know that.
Oh, yeah. But I want you to, because for those who've never been on the toxic tour and been along that 52-mile stretch, for people to realize, let folks know how, when we talk about Fenceline Communities, how close these houses are to these facilities. I mean, we're talking about less than an acre, right? Less than, some of them are what? Just a few feet away from a petrochemical plant or something, right?
Yeah, well, if you imagine just a chemical plant, and obviously it's got a street, right next to it, and then you cross the street and there's a community. So is that close?
And these are primarily Black and brown communities and low income communities.
Yeah, here in Houston, the majority are low income communities, people of color. But because it is a long stretch, there's also a lot of white communities that are on the fence line of the industry.
Right, and that term for our audience is whenever you hear fence line community, that means that your house, your home, your apartment is right next to a facility that if what they're emitting in the air can cause, and you actually can go online and see what chemicals, what pollutants, what volatile organic chemicals are being released in the air, in the water, in the soil. And Juan, I'm sure you have cases in Texas like we do in Sherrard, South Carolina, in Georgia, and in a lot of places where people have been told, in Sherrard, South Carolina, where they've been told that please don't grow any vegetables. You can't have a vegetable garden, right?
Well, they haven't told us, but we've told them that, there's some fence line communities that, they grow fruits, plums or peaches, and they always see this real heavy sort of dust on the peaches. And we tell them, well, let's have it tested to see it. But anyway, it's the chemicals, because you're not going to get a nice plum peach, basically all dark, right? It's just not right. So they know the chemicals are coming in. And let me just touch on another couple of things, Reverend, that I think are important. In the Manchester community, it's got about 3,000 folks there, and they're on the fence line. And right now, what we're trying to do is obviously address their issues. But over the years, and this is a major problem, I think, that happens throughout the country with a lot of our communities, there's been a lot of research that indicates how bad it is. And then they make recommendations as to what should be done or needs to be done. And the problem with environmental justice communities and other communities through the nation is that the recommendations are never followed up.
Right. Mhm.
And they always want to do air monitoring, test for the chemicals that you've been exposed to. And I think that's great. Test for the chemicals, but when you find out that we are being poisoned daily,
Mhm.
what are you going to do about it? That's our question after that. What are you going to do? And most of them will tell you, well, we don't do that. We just find out what the problems are, right? So there's got to be either a federal agency or a state agency or local agency that if the findings are, you're being poisoned,
Mhm.
do something about it. That should be part of the environmental justice movement, that we need to say, do something, because otherwise information for information's sake is not helping us.
Right. And a lot of the research that's done is not, as you said, hidden from the public or not released to the public. And so, you have folks like Dr. Jacoby Wilson and others who advocate for community science, where you can put up your own purple haze monitors. You have the handheld air beam monitors where you can monitor the air quality in the community yourself. But as you have said, the problem is is getting whatever research or recommendations that have been gathered, getting action taking on it. And so that really leads us to a discussion about our policymakers, because regulations and uh, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, they seem to have found ways around that, haven't they? The companies.
Yeah, the companies will always say that they're doing what they're required to do.
Mm.
They have control of the exposures, the amount of it, and uh, I don't want to say they're lying, but the bottom line is that when you have communities that have cancer, have leukemia, have all kinds of other medical issues that no other community has, there's a connection there. And,
Mm.
and the industry obviously doesn't want to make that connection,
Right.
right? And yeah, okay.
A lot of what they do is self-reporting anyway. It's not as if there's a state environmental agency or a state health agency that comes in and can has the bandwidth to check all of them. And for our listeners who may think that this is just limited to petrochemical industries. No, this can happen with any kind of facility that is emitting toxins and pollutants. So, for example, I said Cheraw, South Carolina, which is a Superfund site where a textile and resin manufacturing plant was, and it's a Superfund site, and the residents have been told don't grow any vegetables by EPA. And listen closely to this. If you are outside and your pet is outside, make sure you leave your shoes outdoors before you go into the house, and make sure that you clean off the paws of your cat or your dog before you let them in the house. So this is a prevalent problem that it just what kind of pollution and what kind of companies you have change for locations, but it's the same problem, isn't it, Warren?
Yeah, it's the same problem. And that story reminded me also of when we used to have address house paint, lead-based paint.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a national program to try to get rid of, indoors lead-based paint. And it took time, but it was done. And basically what we're encountering now is another sort of toxic chemical that you're bringing in yourself and your pets and every time you go in and out. That there's no reason for that because it can be prevented. It just needs to be addressed.
Right, absolutely. And so Houston is one of the fastest growing cities in America. I hear I have a son there, and also one of the wealthiest. And part of the problem is because the oil industry, the petrochemical industries bring so much money in that and provide a lot of jobs that it's hard to. It's kind of like the coal miners. I was talking with a former coal miner once, and he said, yes, I know that the work that I was doing might shorten my life, and I saw it happen with other family members, but it was a way of lifting my family out of poverty and putting them in a house, sending my kids to college, and as long as I had good insurance, he said I was willing to take the risk, and so even with the petrochemical and the oil refineries, there's impacts on the people that work there as well, right?
Oh, no, definitely. There's a lot of, again, coming from a union background, we are connected with our union folks here locally in Houston. And they're the frontline employees that get impacted by all these toxic chemicals. But like I said, it provides them jobs, good paying jobs, and a lot of them they need the jobs, and they know how important it is, and they're basically sacrificing their own lives to have things that we need. It works both ways, right? They're dangerous, and somebody's got to do it the way they look at it. But the unions are behind, I guess, enforcement of regulations, because it's going to trickle down to the community. But it's also very difficult to sort of, when they have to negotiate, see, those are the issues that they do in negotiations when contracts come up. But the industry, it's going to be difficult. It's an uphill battle. And the other thing I want to tell you is that here in Houston, being one of the largest cities in the country, it has no zoning regulations.
Yes, that's horrible.
So basically, just hypothetically, but there's warehouses that are in communities that have blown up and then killed people. But hypothetically, look, Exxon could come and build in the middle of downtown. It has no restrictions, right? It ain't gonna happen. But it's a point that we make, that the city of Houston has no zoning regulations. So you're stuck with whatever money can buy in your community.
If they want to put a nuclear facility producing something like tritium, which is used in nuclear weapons, because there's no zoning in Houston, hypothetically, somebody could build a nuclear facility, a nuclear reactor right next to your neighborhood, right?
You bet. And it's something that needs to be addressed, zoning regulations for industry. But it's going to take a long time, Reverend, because the city of Houston is big. Primarily the headquarters to all the gas and oil industries are here in Houston. So there's a lot of pull. And they do, I guess, the way they try to make communities and people not so combating against them is that they also do a lot of, donations and contributions to nonprofits and to universities. That's their give and take, and nobody wants to get rid of that, because generally, money is welcome, and it does buy you stuff. So that's the trade-off, instead of, public health and trying to do, I guess, better monitoring and better regulations, enforcements. In fact, enforcements are one of our biggest issues here in the state of Texas. Region 6 is very pro-industry.
Right. So, people are being drawn to Houston from all over the country. As I said, I have a son there, and I'm guessing too that it draws people too from across the border. And so, how far is Houston from the border? And let's talk about some of the things that are going on at the border right now, which are also having a big, huge impact and and is really rooted in what we're doing to our environment, that what we're doing to our environment, and how that has actually created climate change and climate crises and for communities. So how far are you guys from the border, and I'm assuming you get a lot of people who are coming to America, who come to Houston and wind up working service industry jobs, et cetera, right?
Yes, definitely. We have a huge immigrant population from all areas, not just Mexico. People think that everybody's coming in here is from Mexico, but they're not.
Or
But
Central America.
yeah, but the crisis going on the border right now, it's we should all get involved. It's a humanitarian crisis. They're leaving Haiti for a reason, which is climate change, right? It is having an impact on communities, and they got to go somewhere. People have got to go somewhere,
Mm,
and it's not like they're criminals. They're coming in here because they can afford to come down here. They have to leave their country because of what's happening over there. And unfortunately, you asked, how far is Houston from the border? Anywhere up in the northern area of the state of Texas is anywhere from 8 to 7 hour drive to the border.
mhm,
So we're quite a distance, but it doesn't mean that we're not impacted, because we do have one of the longest borders or biggest borders with Mexico.
mhm,
And what's going on right now is shameful, the way I guess the immigration officers are treating the Haitian population. And there's no justification for it as far as I'm concerned.
mhm,
They're mistreating, the children, the women, the adults. They're not. We're not opening our hands and saying welcome, right? We know you have problems. How can we help? Unfortunately, again, look, Texas does have a big, long border with Mexico.
mhm,
And it's a route that a lot of immigrants take to come into the United States.
mhm,
So maybe we do need immigration reform, but we also can do that without, taking our whips out or horses and putting them on their faces and bumping and pushing them around. We need a just system. There's no reason for us to be treating immigrants running from their country and making it worse. You know,
mhm,
everybody all over the world. Where do you want to go? Some people, right?
mhm,
America. I want to go to America, the land of the free, right? The land of
mhm.
opportunities. Well, let's be that. Let's not just preach and not practice what we preach, right?
Right, absolutely. And we actually back in 2019, along with Agricultural Missions Incorporated, went to Florence, Arizona. Yes, a sister city, Florence, Arizona, and to where they had a immigration detention facility, and spoke with some people who did that work, weren't able to get in, and also, people who have been in the facility, immigrants, etc. And what came out of that was a paper that'll be published by Tuskegee University that links climate change, environmental justice issues, climate change, globalization, and racism all together. So, we have this big problem at our border because we've been building these polluting facilities in low income and people of color communities um, for about 200 years, and they've been emitting pollution into the air, carbon, all kinds of greenhouse gases, which have now blanketed the earth and is trapping the heat of the planet and so we're getting wildfires and torrential rains because the water's being sucked up. What goes up must come down, more intense hurricanes, etc. But in the southern part of our planet, which is the warmest part, people are experiencing droughts, and people don't understand that. In East, the Arab Spring that started in Egypt was because people had a drought. The same problem in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Africa, in Central America, in Mexico, in the Caribbean, that these in Asia, that people are moving from the south to the north because they're having droughts, excessive heat, and they're coming to America. That's where they're coming. And a lot of the people at the border now that are suffering absolute physical abuse at that bridge, a lot of them are Haitians, and the history of the relationship that America has with Haiti is that they have never been desired, and they don't even take them through the process of seeing if they're seeking political asylum. They just send them right back. You know, the first day they sent the Haitians back into a hurricane and earthquake ravaged country that has political turmoil because its president was assassinated. They sent almost 900 people back the first day, and President Biden says he wants to increase that number 10 times. And so I know you were saying, Juan, that while it may not be a direct issue, that Tejas has been looking at that situation and wanting to get involved and looking at how you can get involved. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
Mm.
We've got to fight for justice everywhere.
Mm.
And it can't be picked and choose. You got, if you're gonna really apply justice, it's got to be applied fairly all the time, everywhere you have to.
Yes, yes. And for our viewers, and I said that Haitians have never been desired as immigrants in this country. There's always been pushback. When we have to remember that Haiti was the first country in the Western Hemisphere to win its independence from France and to liberate themselves from slavery. And with Toussaint L'Ouverture, they defeated one of the greatest military leaders in history, Napoleon, not once but twice. And it so made people, slaveholders, so fearful in the USA South and in South America and other places that they cramped down harder on the slaves. And when you've had like boatloads of people from Cuba and other places who had to go through a process to get entry into America. And when the first giant, not first, but a huge flotilla back in 1982 of Haitians came over, just like this, there is no processing them. They just put them, on a plane and send them right back. It's, and it's as if America has never forgiven them for being the first country to overturn the abuses and the shackles, break the shackles of slavery. And so yes, Juan, definitely let us know, how we can weigh in, okay?
Yes, sir, of course.
Yeah, and so, yeah, like you said, and Dr. King said very well, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If they can do it one place, you can be sure that you may be next in your community. So let's look out and see what we can do to support not only Haitians, because as you said, Juan, and I was surprised when we went to the detention center in Arizona, that they want you to think it's just people from Mexico and Central America, but in the detention centers are people from the Caribbean, people from Africa, from around the world. So switching up, what do you think about President Biden? Because he's getting a lot of pushback, a lot of flack over how the troops left in Afghanistan and what's going on at the border. Let's talk about something that he may be doing right. And I'm talking about his executive order on environmental justice and the Justice 40 initiative. Why don't you give us your take on that? How do you feel about that?
I think the Justice 40 initiative obviously is going to be hopefully directed at the needy communities. Mm-hmm. And I fully support the Justice 40 initiative. But I think it's going to be very difficult to figure out really how do you really make it happen? Because you can allocate money for programs, but then you got to make sure that it happens. Mm-hmm. And those decisions will be made obviously by the politicians in your particular city or state or county, right? Where the money is going to go, how much of it, and what's the needs. And if you don't have anyone speaking for those communities, I think that you may be bypassed.
Mm. Now, aren't you involved on a federal level with Justice 40 in some way or another?
Yes, yes, I am involved. I don't know how it happened, but I am one of those individuals, along with 25 others. There's 26 of us that were picked to be on an advisory committee, Environmental Justice Advisory Committee for the White House. Mm-hmm. So we're taking part, we're involved in those conversations, and we're making recommendations, but we'll see what happens, because it's going to be difficult. Anytime you're dealing with programs like this, it's who you connect with, how you mobilize, how you organize, how you get support. In fact, right now, as you know, the states are fighting in some areas that this is too much money going for Justice 40.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and now I'm going to do a shameless plug, because we have put together training, and we've been talking with some people about how we think we can help. So like in Florence, we recommended to our city council that they form a sustainability commission, because a lot of cities aren't educated and aren't positioned to receive the monies and know where the monies should go in terms of environmental justice. Don't you agree?
Yes, sir. No, I agree. We need to have local organizations talking about this, and they need to be energized and mobilized and educated. But that takes time in itself. If you don't have the capacity to go into Houston is huge, one of the largest cities in the nation. We don't have the capacity to go to all those communities that we feel are impacted and can receive some of this Justice 40 money. You need a team, or you need the city to really have meetings, public meetings, to address and also to actually be fair. Because generally what's going to happen when there's money for grabs is going to go to a lot of times to communities that don't need it.
Right.
Because they have the organization support already to push their agenda. And a lot of the low-income communities, first of all, they're afraid of speaking out. There's a lot of intimidation. There's a lot of information that they don't have access to. And they're not set up to go and say, hey, look, we need our streets repairs, our drainage, so, over every time it rains, we flood. It takes a lot of energy, and a lot of people, even if they have the energy, they've never spoken up to an elected official. And in our communities, you address an elected official, and it's like they feel like they're addressing God, that Yeah, they do. It's like they're smart.
I know. I've never felt like that, but I know what you're talking about.
They're very intimidated, just by the fact that they're an elected official, and they feel like they're probably the worst person to be addressing their concerns.
Yeah, but I look at it. This is the largest. The this is historically in the history of this country is the first and the largest attempt to get resources to distressed communities. That's the term that they use to get actual revenue there. So I think that we can figure it out. Of course, there's always the problem with any funding, the philanthropic community or the federal government and state agencies, that the big dogs are going to get, most of the meat, right? But I think, we can get resources down to the ground. And, like I know, having a small organization, that people who are committed and passionate and dedicated can do a whole lot with a little bit of resources. You know what I mean? If Tejas had 10, 20 times the amount of resources that you have now, you would make a huge difference, wouldn't you?
Oh, definitely. The communities, obviously, that we deal with, like you do, they would be so happy and delighted to see that their concerns are being addressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how a fish on a person, you look at them, and it's like, just for instance, right now, if I go up to somebody in my neighborhood and I say, look, here's $500 to help you with whatever, man, I'd be hugging you and kissing you and saying, when you're coming back, right? It's an opportunity that they don't see often. I think that's what we're trying to fight. We're fighting, like yourself, fighting for justice. This is something that every human being should be entitled to. Good neighborhoods, good housing conditions, pretty communities. Why do we have to, be struggling to be the best when you can share resources with everybody and just have a nice whole city, holistic?
Right. And then the other thing is that there are organizations and communities out there that have actually come up with what I like to call community-led solutions. So, you look at Push Buffalo, where they took that abandoned building and it's completely solar powered, and it provides apartments and, offices for nonprofits. And, there are some examples out there of communities that have had very little, but have really implemented change that's good for the environment and helps deal with climate impacts. But the problem is, I think that's one thing that the Justice 40 should focus on. How do you take solutions, organizations that have come up with solutions that work, and give them the resources to amplify or grow the work that they're doing, and then also help them replicate that work with others in other places. And I think that's a good place for Justice 40 resources to go.
The difficulty is exactly what you're saying. How do you get this money to the communities? And because you're talking about a lot of money, it's not going to come to a community. I doubt it. I think it's going to go again to to city planners, counties, and local officials. And if they're not in touch with your community or your issues, you're still going to be left behind. So how do you get people to actually sit at the table and negotiate and say, hey, look, there's Justice 40 money, and needs to come into our communities. It's a good program. It's got good benefits, but now we've got to get people to rise to the challenge and say, I fit this Justice 40 situation, right? I'm an impacted community that has never had resources and needs all this infrastructure worked on. It's going to take time. And how do you do a program that is so prevalent throughout the country because of the injustices that is all of a sudden going to create fair treatment and justice for those communities?
Right. And Justice 40 is talking about 40% of every federal agency's sustainable investment dollars going to what they say called distressed communities. That's the language that is used. And so that's huge when you think about it, because you're talking about housing with HUD. You're talking about rural areas with USDA. You're talking about the energy sector with the Department of Energy. You know what I mean? You're talking about jobs when you're talking about you're talking about the Department of Labor. I mean, the potential to move the needle even a little bit is I think is just awesome. It's just amazing. And I like to always say to people that, well, this country always looks for the macro, the big, huge solutions to everything. Let's build a solar farm that's 10 miles wide, that kind of stuff. But if you get enough micro solutions, if we can get enough small projects going in communities, it can have just as much of a positive impact as a big billion-dollar solution. You know what I'm saying? Because the industry is always looking for how they can make money. Can we do green hydrogen? Can we do pipelines with natural gas? The things they call solutions are things that cost billions of dollars. But, we have an opportunity now to do a lot of small projects that in the aggregate, in the total, can have a tremendous impact. And I get kind of confused when people go there because, we had a whole thing in this country with people switching to LED lights. And that's a change that's been made on a large scale. And it was done by people putting in one light bulb at a time. Don't you agree?
Yes, I agree. In this Justice 40 program, what we also have to realize is that the communities have to pressure their own elected officials because to date, I have not seen any elected officials come to our communities and say, look, this money is available and I'm going to do everything I can in my power to make sure that it comes to our communities. So again, remind yourselves to talk to your elected officials, put them on the spot, tell them, what are you doing to address this situation so that we can get benefits and services that we've never had because, they consider us low income, people of color, and they don't want to invest in our communities. Well, now's the time to, like they say, step up to the plate and not only come and saying, vote for me again, but let me show you some action. Let me show you what I can really do because of, representing you.
Right. And I know when Justice 40 hit the table, we started doing briefings with federal agencies. We went and spoke in front of, with some of our legislators in the South Carolina Black Caucus. We spoke with the person who headed up the State Department for disaster and loss. We went and spoke with the new head of the Sustainability Commission for the state set up by the governor. We made recommendations to our city that led to them forming a Green Sustainability Commission. So what you're saying is absolutely right. We have to get out there and talk to those people and let them know that we need resources and what we need resources for in our community. And it doesn't matter, because Justice 40 touches every federal agency, Department of Transportation, all of that. Whatever the problem, the need, the challenges, and the challenges in your community, whether it's schools, whether it's health, no matter what it is, this thing, Justice 40, gives you an opportunity to make a change in your community. But you have to speak out. You have to lift up your voice. because it's definitely the squeaky wheel that is supposed to get the oil. And I say supposed to, Juan, because a lot of times that doesn't happen, right?
Not a lot of, too many times.
Yeah, I have a friend once who retired now, but used to work with us, and we had worked on a problem small scale, and all of a sudden, all the big organizations and corporations were interested, and he looked at me and said, "Man, doesn't it seem like sometimes we crack the ice?" And after we cracked it, everybody else wants to go fishing, right? And I know you know about that, having been involved in environmental justice for so many years, right?
Definitely.
About 30 years, yeah. So we're starting to get to, but let me say this first. If you are interested in finding out how you can talk to a policymaker, an elected official, and find out some more information about Justice 40, you can look for that online, but also feel free to reach out to us at New Alpha Community Development Corporation. We're working on some things, putting together stakeholder groups, etc. So Juan, great talking with you. We can talk for, forever and ever. And, I remember us being at a UN event and having dinner and hanging out together. You remember that, right? Over in Spain, right? So we can talk forever and ever. And I didn't get to practice my Spanish with you this time. But why don't you tell people, if they're interested in finding out more about Tejas supporting your work or just contacting you, how can they reach Tejas or reach Juan Paras?
Okay, they can call. I'll give you a number, 713-371-7721. And that's the phone number for Ana, my wife.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you can call me too, 281-513-7799. We're both available. Give us a call if you live in the Houston, Harris County area, and we'll get together and see what we can do to make our communities safer and better. And actually, we'll fight for justice, right?
That's right. That's right. And I'm sure they can go to your website also, right? And email you from there, right?
It's TejasBarrios.org. Barrios, neighborhoods.
Tell them what Tejas means too. I forgot to do that.
Oh, Tejas is Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services.
Right. So you can go to Tejas Services or go to TejasBarrios.org. Okay. And also, if you want to reach us at New Alpha Community Development Corporation, you can do that by going to newalphacdc@gmail.com, going to our website, www.newalphacdc.com. And also, do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can see all of our calls. Go to our website and subscribe there so you can keep up with the work and the campaigns that are going on across the country and the work that we are doing. And so until next time, we look forward to having you join us so that we can take direct action, we can educate people in our community, we can change our policymakers and change our communities in the world. All you have to do is respond to the call. So until then, take care. Great having you, Juan.
Thank you. Patient.